My name is Elias Mercer, and I have lived my entire life in a town where the siren goes off every few weeks. I was born in Harper's Mill, a place tucked between rolling fields and a dense stretch of forest that looks endless if you stand at the tree line too long. To outsiders it might seem quaint, an old mill town with a handful of shops, a diner, a church with a leaning steeple, and houses whose paint peels the way bark does in winter. To me it has always been home, though I never understood why we stayed when the air was laced with an unease that even children could sense. The siren has been a part of my life as long as I can remember. It isn't the kind of wail you hear in big cities, when a tornado touches down, or when a storm rips through. This one is lower, longer, and heavier. It rattles inside your chest instead of just in your ears, as if your bones are part of its machinery. It starts without warning, usually at night, stretching across the sky for 3 minutes exactly. Then it stops. People never talk about it afterward, not even the next day at the diner. Not even when kids ask too many questions. The silence about the siren is almost louder than the thing itself. When I was younger, I thought it was an emergency system. My mother told me not to worry, that it was just precaution, though she never explained what we were preparing for. She'd hush me if I pressed, her lips going thin as though she had said too much already. My father was worse. He'd stare out the window when it blared, knuckles resting on the sill, his shoulders locked tight. Once when I was 9, I asked him why he looked that way. He told me to go to bed. That was the end of it. The strange thing about Harper's Mill is how normal everyone pretends to be. Life goes on in neat routines. The mill workers swap shifts. The high school football games draw half the town, and the church bells ring every Sunday morning. But under it all, there's this quiet choreography. People know when the siren is coming before it does. You can see it in the way they move, how shopkeepers close early with flimsy excuses, how curtains are drawn earlier than usual, how the streets empty in a slow exodus no one comments on. Then, when the sound breaks loose, every door is shut, every light turned off. You won't find anyone outside, not one. I noticed that as a teenager, though at the time I still thought maybe it was coincidence, a town habit. I told myself I was imagining things, but the pattern was too clean to be chance. I started keeping track in a notebook, marking the dates when the siren came. At first I thought maybe it was on a schedule, every 3 weeks, give or take, but the spacing shifted. Sometimes 18 days, sometimes 24. Once, almost 6 weeks passed before the next. That irregularity gnawed at me, because if it was for testing or for weather alerts, wouldn't it be regular? Wouldn't there be some official posting about it? There was nothing. No announcements. No articles in the Harper's Mill Gazette. Not even a whisper at school. The older I got, the more it felt like I was being kept outside of some wall everyone else already lived within. By the time I turned 24, the siren was less of a mystery and more of a splinter in my mind. I couldn't let it go, though most people seemed content never to mention it. I worked at the hardware store on Main Street, same as my father had before me. Business was slow, which left plenty of hours for me to stand behind the counter and listen to the hum of fluorescent lights while my thoughts circled the same questions. What was the siren for? Who controlled it? And why did no one ever question it except me? I tried once, just once, to ask openly. It was a Tuesday, and the old postman, Mr. Wetlock, came in for nails. He was in his 70s, the sort of man who still wore a cap with the town's faded emblem stitched on it. I asked him, casual as I could, if he remembered when the siren first started. He froze right there in the aisle, one hand hovering over the box of nails. His face went slack, eyes fixed on me like I'd said something obscene. Then he muttered, Don't go poking at things that don't want to be poked, son, and left without buying a thing. That was when I realized the silence wasn't ignorance. It was obedience. The night that changed everything came in late August, heavy with heat. I was lying in bed, window open, when I felt it before I heard it. The air shifted, almost like a pressure drop before a storm, though the sky had been clear. My skin prickled. Then the siren wailed, low and punishing, so loud it seemed like the window glass should shatter. 3 minutes. Always 3. I lay there staring at the ceiling, fists balled in the sheets. That was the first time I made a choice different from everyone else in town. When the siren cut off, I stayed awake waiting. Around me, the town sank into a hush that was unnatural, like the world had been put on pause. I slipped on my shoes, eased my door shut behind me, and stepped out into the night. The streets were empty, just as they always were when the siren came. But I had never been out during one before. I had never seen what the town looked like in that hush. It was wrong. Not just empty. Wrong. The lamps along Main Street weren't glowing, though I knew for a fact some of them were automatic. The houses looked abandoned. Not in the sense of years gone by, but in the sense of every single human thread pulled out of them at once. Curtains drawn tight, but even behind them I didn't sense presence. No shadows shifting. No TV screens flickering. No muffled voices. Just hollow. I walked toward the center of town, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. At the square stood the old clock tower, brick with a green patina that never seemed to leave. That's where the siren lived, its speakers mounted near the top, facing each direction like a watchman with 4 heads. The clock's hands read midnight. They always did. I had checked before. The clock never moved. I craned my neck and stared up at those black grills, wondering what kind of machine sat behind them. It occurred to me then that I had never actually seen anyone maintain it. No ladder trucks, no workers. It just always functioned, decade after decade, like it belonged not to us but to something older. That night, as I stood there, I heard something else, a scrape. Not from above, but below. The square's paving stones were uneven, many cracked or sunken. From one corner near the base of the tower, a stone shifted. I froze, breath snagging in my throat. The stone moved again, a fraction, as if something beneath it was testing the weight. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on the gap that was opening. From it came a draft, damp and metallic, carrying with it the faintest scent of iron. The stone lifted half an inch, just enough for me to glimpse blackness beneath. I thought of my father at the window, shoulders stiff, and I understood suddenly. This was what he had been listening for. Not the siren itself, but the moment after. The moment when whatever lay beneath us stirred. I ran home. For the next week, I told myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was rats, or the heat-warping stone. But the smell, that sharp iron tang, clung to me. It was not the smell of rats. It was the smell of blood. And then came the day, when I finally learned why the siren existed. It was September, and the air had cooled just enough to tempt me back outside at night. I had promised myself I wouldn't return to the square, but curiosity is a disease, and mine had festered too long. I timed it carefully, watching my notes, guessing when the next call would rise. I wasn't wrong. That Friday, as the sun bled out behind the trees, I walked to the diner, sat in a booth by the window, and waited. At 10:07, the waitress, a girl barely out of high school, set down my coffee. Her hand trembled just enough to make the spoon clink. Her eyes darted to the clock above the register. She knew. I looked around and realized everyone in the diner knew. Half-finished plates were abandoned, checks paid in haste. By 10:12, I was the only one left. Then the siren howled, and for the first time, I did not run home. I headed toward the square instead. The night I chose not to go home felt different from the start. The siren began its long groan, rattling the glass storefronts as though every window was a drumhead. I walked against it, toward the square, my steps falling in rhythm with that unnatural wail. Fear wasn't absent. My stomach churned, my jaw ached from clenching, but curiosity had wrapped itself tighter than fear ever could. The streets were hollow as before, emptied of their life. Porch lights extinguished, cars tucked silent into driveways. Even the dogs that usually barked at night were absent, as if someone had called them all inside. The sound stretched through my bones. When it stopped at exactly 3 minutes, the silence was absolute. That was the moment I reached the square. The clock tower loomed above me, more a sentinel than a landmark. Its brick sides were darker than I remembered, as though the siren had scarred them. The black speaker grills stared into every direction, daring me to stand exposed. I forced my feet forward, eyes searching the cracks between stones. I wasn't wrong. One near the base shifted, just as I had seen before. The scrape was louder this time, unashamed. A wedge of stone tilted upward, no longer tentative but purposeful. My chest tightened. Instinct told me to back away, but stubbornness held me fast. The gap widened until I could see a stairwell descending into black. Steps carved from stone, slick and shining faintly as if from moisture, cut a spiral down below the square. I had never known anything was beneath us. I hesitated, my breath shallow. My father's voice, stern, final, echoed in my memory, "Don't ask, don't poke." But I had already poked. I had already seen too much to unsee. The stairwell breathed a damp chill against my face. I thought of the years of silence, of the way the whole town bent itself around this ritual. If I didn't go down now, I would never know. I stepped inside. The air closed over me like water. The stone stairs descended sharply, slick with condensation. My hand brushed the wall to steady myself, fingers sliding on damp grit. The square's faint light vanished after 2 turns, leaving me in dark so complete I could taste it. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumbed on the flashlight. The beam shook with my hand, catching glints off the wet stone. The staircase kept winding, down and down, farther than any clock tower should allow. I counted steps: 40, then 60, then over 100. The air thickened, metallic and sharp, each breath more difficult than the last. My pulse roared in my ears, but I kept going. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a cavern. The space was massive, a hollowed-out chamber beneath the town. The ceiling arched high above, ribbed like the inside of some giant creature. The walls glistened, not only with moisture, but with streaks of something darker, something that looked too much like dried blood. My light skimmed over stone pillars, rising from floor to ceiling, carved in precise lines, unnatural geometry that made my eyes ache if I stared too long. And then I saw them, people. Rows of figures stood between the pillars, facing the same direction, their backs to me. Dozens of them, motionless. My heart seized before I realized they weren't alive. They were statues, not of marble or bronze, but of something pale and porous, like calcified bone. Each figure was detailed with horrifying precision, frozen mid-gesture, mouths open, eyes wide. They looked like townsfolk, not generic men and women, but faces I thought I recognized, distorted in terror. I swallowed hard, stepping closer. My light caught on one statue's face, and I staggered back. It was Mr. Whitla, the postman who had warned me weeks earlier. His features were unmistakable, though twisted in a scream that never finished. His cap sat crooked, carved into that bone like material as though turned to stone in an instant. My stomach heaved. These weren't statues. These were people. A sound stirred behind the pillars, low, dragging. My light jerked toward it, catching only the flash of movement. Something retreating deeper into the chamber. My throat went dry. I told myself to turn back, to climb the stairs, but my feet betrayed me. They carried me forward, weaving between those frozen forms, following the sound. At the far end of the chamber, another staircase descended still further. I stood at its mouth, staring down into deeper dark. The air that rose from it was foul, rank with a mix of rust, earth, and rot. My body screamed to run, but I pressed on, descending into whatever waited below. This stairwell was shorter, only 20 steps or so, and it opened into a narrow tunnel. The walls here weren't carved stone. They were raw, scraped earth, claw-marked, as if widened by hands too strong or too many to count. My light flickered. I cursed, shaking the phone until it steadied. The tunnel sloped downward until it opened into another chamber, smaller, more intimate. At its center was a pit, a circular mouth, rimmed with stone yawning into black. From it rose a sound that was not the siren, yet carried the same weight. A hum, steady and low, vibrating the soles of my shoes. I edged closer, holding the light over its lip. The pit wasn't empty. Far below, movement churned. Limbs, or things like limbs, coiled in the dark. Not human, not animal, but something older, segmented and endless. The air throbbed with its breathing, each exhale rushing up the shaft to coat my skin. My heart hammered against my ribs. I could not look away. Then, from somewhere above, another sound echoed, a metallic clang, like the tower's machinery engaging again. I remembered. The siren was never just a warning. It was a signal. The thing in the pit shifted, responding to it. The hum in my bones deepened. That was when I saw the eyes. Pairs upon pairs, glowing faintly red, opening in the dark far below. Dozens of them, all tilting upward, fixing on me. My knees buckled. The light trembled in my hand, scattering across the pit's edge. A sound followed, rising from deep within that impossible body. Not a roar, not a screech. A word. It spoke. Not in language as we know it, but in something older, shaped in vibration rather than syllable. Still, my mind twisted it into meaning. One word carried up through stone and air, striking my thoughts raw. Hungry. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my phone. My breath came shallow and fast, like I couldn't pull enough air in. The chamber seemed to constrict around me. The statues upstairs, the silence in town, the siren itself. Suddenly it all arranged into a pattern too dreadful to ignore. The siren wasn't warning us. It was feeding it. Every few weeks when the sound blared, it wasn't to keep us safe. It was to tell the thing that the time had come again, to call it awake, to open the way beneath the square so something, or someone, could be delivered. My hand pressed against the tunnel wall to steady myself, and my fingers brushed something soft. I recoiled, shining my light. It was fabric. A shoe. My stomach dropped. A body slumped against the wall, slack and pale. A man I didn't recognize, eyes rolled back, chest unmoving. His clothes were recent. He hadn't been here long. Sacrifice. I staggered away, my whole body trembling. The hum from the pit grew louder, as though feeding on my fear. I turned and ran, crashing back through the tunnel, up the stairs, through the chamber of statues, without daring to meet their eyes. My footsteps echoed frantic against stone, chasing me upward. By the time I reached the first stairwell, my lungs burned. I climbed, faster and faster, until at last the square's night air hit me. I collapsed against the pavement, gasping, the cool wind burning in my chest. The town was still silent, the houses still dark. No one had seen, no one had followed. The stone behind me shifted, lowering back into place, sealing the stairwell as if it had never been. I staggered home on numb legs, every shadow a threat, every window watching. When I finally collapsed into bed, I lay awake until dawn, the words still etched into me like fire. Hungry. The days that followed were worse than the night itself. Every face in town seemed suspicious. Did they know? Of course they did. That silence, that obedience, it wasn't ignorance. It was agreement. They were part of it. Maybe all of them. Maybe even my parents. I tried to ask my father again just once. I caught him on the porch, hands folded on his knees, staring out at the trees. My voice shook as I said, I went to the square. I saw what's under there. He didn't look at me. His jaw tightened, and he said only one thing. You should have stayed inside. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but his tone ended it. It wasn't anger. It was fear. He was afraid not of me, but of what I had seen. That was when I understood fully. Harper's Mill doesn't survive despite the siren. It survives because of it. And now that I had stepped outside the silence, I wasn't sure the town would let me survive at all. I didn't sleep for more than an hour at a time after that night. Whenever my eyes closed, I saw them rows of faces frozen in bone. The pit's red eyes flickering open like embers, the body slumped in the tunnel. I would jerk awake to silence, but not the safe kind. Silence here had changed shape for me. It wasn't absence. It was waiting. The town moved as it always had. People bought groceries. Kids chased one another down the sidewalks. The church bell clanged on schedule. Nothing looked different, and that was worse. I kept looking for cracks in the facade, some twitch of guilt or fear, but everyone wore the same calm mask. If anything, I was the one who stuck out. I caught glances lingering on me longer than usual. Mrs. Han at the bakery, 2 deputies outside the sheriff's office, the cashier at the gas station. Their smiles were too quick, their eyes unreadable. I started wondering how the sacrifices were chosen. That body in the tunnel wasn't random. Someone had been given. Someone had been taken. And if it wasn't random, if it was chosen, then who made the choice? My father's silence haunted me most. Every night after dinner, he'd sit at the window like he always had, shoulders squared, gaze locked on the square, though you couldn't see it from our house. My mother would busy herself in the kitchen, movements mechanical. Neither of them spoke about what lay under us. Neither of them acknowledged my shaking hands or the circles under my eyes. Their refusal to speak was answer enough. They knew. They'd always known. The next siren came 12 nights later. I felt it before it sounded, that same drop in pressure, a shift that stirred the hairs on my arms. At 10:11, the wail rolled out across the town. I didn't run outside this time. I stayed at the window watching. The streets emptied in minutes, curtains closing, doors locking. And then, on the far side of the street, I saw something I never had before. 2 men in dark coats moved between houses, steady, purposeful. They weren't running from the sound. They were moving with it. One of them carried a lantern, though every porch light was off. The other dragged something slumped over his shoulder. I pressed my face closer to the glass, heart clawing its way up my throat. The body was limp, head hanging, hair dangling over the man's back. Whoever it was, they weren't fighting. Either unconscious or already gone. The 2 men moved down the street, out of sight, toward the square. The sacrifice wasn't random. It was collected. The siren stopped, the silence swallowing everything again. I wanted to bolt after them, to follow, but I couldn't force myself out the door. My feet felt nailed to the floorboards. I stayed there long after the sound died, staring at the empty street. The ghost of those 2 men burned into my vision. When morning came, I tried to ask around carefully. At the hardware store, I asked Mrs. Han if she'd noticed anyone missing lately. She gave me a sharp smile, too tight, and said, "People move on sometimes, Elias. That's life." At the diner, I overheard 2 men talking about a cousin who left town quick. The tone was casual, but their eyes flicked toward me, and their voices dropped. It clicked. Anyone who disappeared, anyone who was taken, was written off as having left. No questions, no posters, no searching, just vanished into that silence. I started keeping track again. Only now it wasn't dates, it was faces. Mr. Wetlock, the postman. The man slumped in the tunnel, though I didn't know his name. And then, after that last siren, I noticed the high school janitor was gone. He used to sweep the lot every morning before students arrived. Now, the lot was dirty and no one mentioned him. 3. In less than a month. The weight of it pressed on me until I could barely breathe. I wanted to leave town, to pack a bag and vanish before anyone decided my name belonged on that list. But Harper's Mill is a trap in its own quiet way. The nearest bus stop is 30 miles. The roads that lead out curve endlessly through forest, and gas stations are scarce. I had the sense, even if I tried, they would know. The town would not let me go. One evening, I tried to talk to my mother. She was folding laundry, hands moving automatically, eyes glazed over. I asked her, straight out, "Do you know how they choose?" The fabric slipped from her hands. She froze, shoulders trembling. For a long moment, I thought she would answer. Instead, she whispered, "Elias, please," and turned away, her face hidden. That plea told me enough. She knew. Maybe she had always known who was next and when. Maybe parents had to live with that knowledge. I couldn't sit with it anymore. I had to know. The following week, I watched the square from a distance. I hid in the tree line at the edge of the green, crouched between roots, waiting. The siren began at 10:10 sharp that night. The town fell still, lights going dark. And then I saw them again, the two men in coats. This time, they weren't carrying anyone. They were escorting. A boy walked between them, no older than 17. His arms were limp at his sides, his face slack, eyes open but vacant. They guided him across the square to the clock tower. As the stone shifted, revealing the stairwell, they led him down without resistance. I pressed a fist against my mouth, choking back a sound. The boy didn't fight, didn't cry. He just walked. The stairwell closed behind them, sealing the night as if nothing had happened. The siren cut off, and the silence settled. I stayed crouched until my legs went numb. When I finally stumbled home, I felt certain of one thing: the sacrifices weren't always taken. Sometimes, they went willingly. But how? The next morning, I looked for the boy. His name was Adam Klein. I remembered him from the hardware store, where he'd bought sandpaper for a school project just a month ago. Now, his house was shuttered. His parents didn't answer the door. At the diner, no one spoke of him. Another vanishing folded neatly into the town's routine. I wanted to scream, to break the silence, but the weight of it pressed against my teeth. Every time I tried, I pictured the statues in that cavern, mouths open, frozen in eternal warning. Then came the note. It was slipped under my door 3 nights later, no envelope, just a folded sheet of paper. Inside, in shaky handwriting, were 4 words: "You're being considered next." The world spun beneath me. My hands shook so violently I nearly tore the paper. Someone knew I had seen too much. Someone had named me. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't confront anyone. I burned the note in the sink and watched the ash swirl away, but the words remained branded behind my eyes. Every sound outside made me flinch. Every knock at the hardware store felt like a signal. I tried to leave. I drove north, past the mill, onto the stretch of road that cut into forest. My gas tank was full, my backpack packed with food and water. For an hour I drove under the green canopy, windows down, heart hammering with desperate hope. But the road curved back. I swear on my life, it curved back. The trees pressed closer, the road bent again, and before I understood what was happening, I saw the "Welcome to Harper's Mill" sign. My stomach dropped to ice. I had never turned the wheel. The road had bent on its own. I pulled over, chest heaving, sweat soaking through my shirt. No matter where you tried to go, the town pulled you back. That's why no one left. That's why the missing were never found outside. Harper's Mill wasn't just complicit, it was alive. I returned home shaking, parked the car, and sat in the driveway until dusk. My father came out onto the porch, looked at me once, then looked away. No words passed between us. He knew where I'd gone. He knew it was useless. That night, as I lay awake, I thought about the pit, about the word it had spoken. Hungry. Sacrifices weren't random. And they weren't just given. They were demanded. And once your name was spoken in this town, you belonged to it. The next siren was coming soon. I could feel it in the air. That pressure shift crawling along my skin. I knew my name might already be chosen. And if it was, I wasn't sure whether I would go down screaming, or whether something would hollow me out until I walked willing, the way Adam Klein had. Because in Harper's Mill, silence wasn't safety. Silence was surrender. The week that followed was a blur of dread. I went through the motions at the hardware store, ringing up customers, stocking shelves, but every second felt borrowed. Every look lingered too long. Every handshake lasted a beat past comfort. I caught whispers that died when I entered rooms. The silence had thickened around me. Not just the silence of the siren nights, but the silence of people watching without speaking. The note replayed in my mind. You're being considered next. That word, considered, gnawed worse than hunger itself. It meant a choice had not yet been finalized. It meant someone somewhere in this town was weighing me like a lamb at market. My stomach turned whenever I thought about it. I began to look at everyone with suspicion, even my own parents. Especially my own parents. One evening after closing, I asked my father directly. I stood in the doorway while he sat in his chair, hands folded, his gaze fixed on nothing. "Was it you?" I asked. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Did you put my name forward?" He didn't flinch. He didn't even look at me. "It's not me who decides," he said, voice low and gravelly. "But if your name's in consideration, Elias, you won't stop it by asking." The words gutted me. Not a denial, not comfort, just resignation. I wanted to shout at him, to demand why he'd lived his whole life under the shadow of that thing below us. But anger dried up on my tongue. His shoulders sagged with the weight of years of knowing, of accepting. And I saw then that he'd been waiting his whole life for his turn too. That was how people survived in Harper's Mill, by surrendering to the inevitability that one day, silence would claim them. But I wasn't ready to surrender. The next siren came on a Thursday. The day had been heavy with heat, cicadas screaming in the trees until evening. As night settled, I felt the familiar shift in the air. The pressure dropped, and my skin prickled. At 10:11, the siren's low wail broke loose, shaking through the walls of the hardware store as I stood behind the counter. I'd stayed late on purpose, waiting. When the sound cut off at 3 minutes, I slipped out the back door into the alley. The streets emptied, curtains shut, same ritual as always. But this time I wasn't the only one out. At the corner of Main and Birch, I saw them again, the two men in coats. Their lantern burned steady, their steps sure. But this time, they weren't carrying anyone. They were searching. My breath caught. They were looking for me. I ducked behind the dumpster, crouched low, heart pounding so loud I thought they would hear it. The beam of their lantern swept across the street, up porches, along windows. They paused at the hardware store's front door, rattled the handle, then moved on. I stayed frozen until their footsteps faded into the square. I should have run home, but home wasn't safe, not anymore. If the town had named me, my parents wouldn't stop it. They couldn't. So instead I followed, keeping low in the shadows, trailing them from a distance. The square was darker than I'd ever seen it. Not even moonlight seemed to penetrate fully. The clock tower loomed, its dead hands pointing forever at midnight. I watched from the tree line as the two men reached the base. They placed their lantern on the ground and pressed their palms against the stone. I heard the scrape, the grinding shift as the paving stones lifted, opening the stairwell. They descended, vanishing into the dark below. I should have run. Every instinct begged me to. But my body moved before my mind could stop it. I crept forward, across the grass, into the square. My breath came shallow, my steps soundless. The stairwell gaped wide, black air rising from it. Without letting myself think, I followed them down. The stone was slick underfoot, the air damp and metallic. I descended quickly, counting the turns until I reached the cavern. The statues loomed in the beam of my phone's light, their frozen mouths gaping. I felt them watching, warning, but I pressed forward. The two men were ahead, their lantern glow bobbing deeper into the chamber. They moved between the pillars, past the statues, toward the second stairwell that led down to the tunnel and the pit. I hung back, keeping distance. They weren't alone. In the glow of their lantern, I saw 3 more figures waiting at the tunnel mouth. Town leaders, Sheriff Harlan, the pastor from the church, and Mrs. Avery from the school board. Their faces were drawn tight, pale in the flickering light. They spoke in hushed voices I couldn't hear, then turned toward the pit. I crept closer, heart pounding. The sheriff held a ledger. He opened it, flipped through pages, then tapped one with his finger. The others nodded. My stomach dropped as I realized what it was: a record: names, dates, the list of those chosen. The sheriff read aloud, his voice echoing faintly. I strained to hear, crouched low behind a pillar. When the name left his mouth, I nearly collapsed. Elias Mercer. The cavern seemed to tilt. My legs went weak, bile rose in my throat. They had decided. My name was inked in that ledger, sealed in silence. The group moved toward the tunnel, the 2 men in coats leading the way. I backed away too fast, my foot scuffing against stone. The sound echoed sharp in the chamber. 5 heads snapped toward me. The lantern's beam caught me in its circle, pinning me against the pillar. Sheriff Harlan's eyes locked onto mine. No surprise, no anger, just inevitability. "It's time, Elias," he said, voice flat. I bolted. I ran between the statues, my light swinging wild, shadows leaping. Behind me, footsteps thundered, voices called. I didn't look back. I sprinted for the stairwell, lungs burning, every breath a ragged knife. The cavern stretched longer than I remembered. The exit too far. Hands closed on my shoulder. I wrenched free, slamming an elbow into someone's ribs. I didn't know who. I didn't care. My legs carried me upward, stumbling, clawing against the damp stone. The darkness pressed close, the air too thick, but I forced myself higher. When I burst into the square, the night air hit me like fire. I stumbled across the grass, chest heaving. Behind me, the stone grated, beginning to close. Voices rose in the stairwell, echoing upward, but the opening sealed, shutting them beneath. I collapsed against the clock tower, gasping, sweat pouring down my face. My whole body trembled. The siren had ended, the silence settled, but I knew it wouldn't last. They had spoken my name. I staggered home, every step an eternity. When I reached the porch, my father was waiting, sitting in his chair. He looked at me once, then away, as though ashamed. My mother stood in the doorway, her hands twisting the fabric of her apron. "They'll come again," my father said softly. "You can't outrun it, Elias." "None of us can." "I won't go," I rasped. My throat burned. "I won't." He didn't answer. His silence was heavier than any words. That night, I barricaded my bedroom door, shoving the dresser against it, piling boxes. I sat with my back to the wall, a knife in my hand, though I knew it would do nothing against the thing below or the people above. I didn't sleep. I listened to the silence, waiting for the next siren. When dawn came, I dragged myself to the window. The street looked normal. Children rode bikes, mailboxes clanged shut, a dog barked. But every glance, every casual smile, felt like a mask covering hunger. The whole town had decided to let me go. I thought of the pit, the red eyes, the word it had spoken. Hungry. How many names had been fed to it? Generation after generation. And now mine was next. But as I stared out at the town, another thought pressed in, one I couldn't shake. If the town could not be left, if the road always brought you back, then maybe the answer wasn't escape. Maybe the only way out was down. Because if the pit had spoken once, it could speak again. And maybe, just maybe, it could listen. I didn't wait for the next siren. Waiting meant surrender, and I had lived too long beneath its shadow to die silent. If the town had chosen me, if the ledger bore my name, then the only chance I had was to claim the choice myself. I told myself that all night as I sat with my knife, staring at the barricaded door, listening to the weight of silence pressing through the walls. I told myself that if the pit could speak, then it could also hear. The following evening, I walked straight into the square. No one stopped me. The town bustled as it always did. Shutters open, children laughing, the smell of fried food drifting from the diner. But I could feel the eyes. Every glance slid off me too quickly. Every smile was brittle. They knew what I was. They knew where I was headed. And none of them would interfere. The clock tower rose above me, lifeless hands stuck at midnight. I walked to its base, palms slick, and pressed my hands against the stone where I had seen the two men do it before. For a breath, nothing happened. Then came the scrape, the slow shifting grind. The paving stone tilted, the stairwell gaped open, and the damp breath of the pit rolled up to meet me. I descended alone. The spiral swallowed me, darkness pressing closer with every step. My phone's light jittered, throwing beams across the wet walls. When I reached the cavern, the statues loomed once more, their mouths open, their eyes wide. I forced myself not to look too long at any of them. Not at Mr. Whitlock, not at Adam Klein, not at the dozens of others caught forever in silent warning. The chamber was empty of the town leaders. No lanterns bobbed, no voices echoed. For the first time, I was alone with what lay beneath us. My steps echoed too loud against stone as I moved to the far end, to the tunnel. The air grew thicker, heavier, as if the pit already knew I was coming. The tunnel walls clawed with old marks, gouges that might have been fingernails or something worse. My stomach churned, but I pressed forward until the chamber opened, smaller, rimmed by the stone circle. The pit yawned wide, black and endless. The hum rose up from it, vibrating through my chest, steady as a heartbeat. I stood at its edge, staring into the dark. My voice trembled, but I forced it out. "You don't need me." The hum deepened, rolling through the chamber like laughter. Below, movement stirred. Coils shifted. Limbs flexed. My light barely grazed their edges before vanishing into shadow. Then the eyes opened, dozens of them, red and glimmering like embers scattered in a furnace. Hungry, the voice reverberated. I gritted my teeth, my fists tight at my sides. Then feed on them. I spat. My words cracked in the stale air. The town. The ones who give you names. The ones who keep you chained here. Why should I die for their silence? The hum wavered, not in confusion but in interest. The red eyes blinked, focused. I felt the weight of them pressing against me, peeling me open, sifting through my thoughts. They obey. The pit's voice pulsed, shaping the vibrations into thought. You defy. Because I'm not afraid. I lied, though my legs shook. Because I'm not hollow enough to walk down here willingly. I won't give you silence. I'll give you voice. I'll tell the world what you are. The cavern trembled. Dust sifted from the ceiling. The eyes narrowed, then widened, then multiplied until it felt like a crowd staring into me. The hum thickened until my bones rattled. Then speak, it said. My throat went dry. I didn't know what I expected, but not this. Not permission. My phone light flickered, dimmed, then surged. as if fed by the pit itself. The statues in the chamber above flashed in my mind, their mouths open, forever silent. If I spoke here, maybe I would join them. Maybe that was the cost. Still, I leaned over the pit, my voice cracking against the depth. I name you. The sound echoed down, swallowed by the dark. I name you as theirs. I continued louder. I name you as the shadow they feed. I name you as the hunger they fear. And I name myself as the one who will not walk quiet into your mouth. The hum shifted, rising into a keening note that twisted through my skull. The ground quaked beneath my feet. I stumbled back, but the voice followed, not words this time, but emotion, amusement, recognition. You are mine, it said, with a certainty that hollowed my chest. No, I whispered, though the denial felt thin. You are chosen, it pressed. But you are not offering silence. You offer me song. The red eyes blazed, and the hum reached a pitch that threatened to tear the air apart. For one searing second, I thought the chamber would collapse, the pit would rise, and I would be dragged into it. But then the sound cut off. The eyes blinked shut. The movement stilled. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before. I stumbled from the chamber, through the tunnel, past the statues that seemed to lean closer now. My light flickered, then steadied. I climbed the stairwell, my legs shaking, lungs burning, until the square's night air wrapped around me once more. The streets were dark, the town shuddered in its ritual hush. But when I emerged, I wasn't seized. No one waited at the top. The square was empty. The stone sealed behind me with a final scrape. I walked home in a daze. My father sat on the porch, as always, his hands folded. When his eyes found me, they widened just slightly, the smallest break in his eternal mask. He saw that I had gone down and come back. You're still here, he murmured, disbelief soft in his voice. I spoke to it, I said. My throat felt shredded. It knows my name. His face crumpled with something like grief. Then it's only a matter of time. Maybe he was right. Maybe my defiance had only postponed the inevitable. But something had changed in me. The silence no longer weighed the same. The town's obedience looked fragile now, paper thin. The next siren came 2 weeks later. I stood in the square as it blared unhidden, unafraid. Curtains closed, doors locked, streets emptied. But I stood alone beneath the clock tower, staring up at its dead hands. When the sound cut off, the silence pressed in, and I spoke. Not to the town, not to the people hiding in their houses, but to the pit beneath us. My words cut through the night, raw and trembling, but louder than the hush around me. You won't have me quiet, I said. Not now, not ever. The ground shivered, faint but real, beneath my feet. I felt it listening. The silence broke, not with screams, not with the opening of the stairwell, but with the sound of a window sliding shut somewhere behind me. Someone had heard. Someone knew the silence had been pierced. The town could not last forever on obedience. Hunger only grows. And I had named it. I had spoken when every mouth had stayed shut. Maybe that meant the pit would come for me first, sooner than I could prepare. Maybe it meant I would become another statue, mouth open forever in warning. But maybe it meant something else. Maybe I had taught it a new word.